Chapter 1: Blackwood's Breath. Dust motes swam in the weak sunlight piercing the tall, arched windows of Blackwood Manor's entrance hall. Eleanor Vance brushed a stray strand of gray hair from her forehead, her gaze sweeping over the decaying grandeur. Water stains mapped forgotten leaks across the ceiling plaster. The air hung thick with the scent of old paper, damp stone, and something else. A faint, cloying sweetness like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. Impressive, isn't it? Liam Chen, the architecture student, sketched rapidly in his notebook, capturing the curve of the grand staircase. The woodwork alone, shame about the state of it. Marco Rossi, the engineer, tapped a gloved knuckle against a section of wall near the main door. A small shower of plaster dust fell. Impressive structure, maybe. Needs more than a coat of paint. Load-bearing points look questionable in places. He squinted up at the ceiling. Water damage is extensive. From deeper within the house, a nervous cough echoed. Ben Carter, the caretaker, emerged from a shadowed doorway, wringing his hands. He was younger than Eleanor expected, his eyes darting around the hall as if anticipating something unpleasant. "Everyone's here, then. Ms. Vance, Mr. Rossi." He nodded jerkily at Liam and then at Serafina Bell, the mycology student standing near a patch of peculiar greenish mold by the skirting board. "Dr. Finch sends his apologies. A sudden illness." He asked Ms. Bell to proceed with the initial survey. Serafina looked up, pushing her glasses higher on her nose. "It's unusual, the mold structure." She gestured with a pen. "Not typical for this level of humidity or substrate." Ben shifted his weight. "Lots of strange things grow here. Place has been shut up tight for decades. Old man Blackwood, he liked his privacy." He gestured vaguely towards the interior. "This way. The main library is where he kept, well, most things." They followed Ben through corridors lined with peeling wallpaper and portraits whose eyes seemed unnervingly focused. Floorboards groaned underfoot. Marco pointed out sagging beams and cracked window panes. Liam continued sketching, murmuring about stylistic periods and structural compromises. Eleanor tried to focus on her historical research objectives: Blackwood's life, his reclusive final years, the mansion's construction, but the oppressive atmosphere pressed in. The silence wasn't empty, it seemed to listen. The library was vast, 2 stories high, walled with bookshelves choked with leather-bound volumes. A thick carpet of dust covered every horizontal surface. In the center of the room, dominating the space, stood the terrarium. It was enormous, easily 10 feet long and 6 feet high, constructed of thick, greenish glass panels set into an ornate blackened iron frame. Intricate metalwork depicting vines and strange insects crawled over the structure. Inside, a dense jungle thrived, though no light source was apparent. Thick, waxy leaves pressed against the glass. Strange, bulbous fungi pulsed with faint, internal luminescence. Twisted, dark vines snaked through the miniature ecosystem, obscuring much of the interior. It looked ancient, self-contained, and utterly alien. "My God," Serafina breathed, stepping closer. "It's completely sealed. How is it still viable?" She ran a finger along the cool glass. "The species. I don't recognize any of this. It defies conventional biology." Liam circled it, sketching furiously. "Victorian ingenuity or madness. Look at the craftsmanship on the frame." Marco examined the base. Heavy, must weigh tons. Floor seems reinforced here. He frowned, tapping the glass near a corner seal. Looks like iron gall ink corrosion on the metal. The seal integrity might be variable. Elena consulted her notes. Blackwood was a biologist, though largely discredited. Theories on extremophiles, abiogenesis, radical stuff for his time. Records suggest he sealed this thing around 1890, called it his primordium. Ben stayed near the doorway, arms crossed tightly. Never liked this room. Feels wrong, he shivered, though the library wasn't cold. Sometimes late at night, you hear things like whispers coming from in there. Pressure differentials, trapped gases escaping, Marco offered, though he didn't sound convinced. Serafina was practically pressing her face to the glass. The biodiversity is impossible. It's like a pocket of evolution running on entirely different principles. As she leaned closer, a low rumble vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't thunder. It was deeper, more resonant. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. A stack of books on a high shelf teetered, then crashed to the floor, sending up a plume of gray particles that hung in the air. What was that? Liam startled, stepping back from the terrarium. Marco steadied himself. Settling, or maybe something more significant structurally, this old place. Ben's face was pale. Happens sometimes, house groans. The vibration subsided, but near the base of the terrarium where Marco had inspected the seal, a tiny fissure, hairline thin, appeared in the ancient glass. A minuscule puff, almost invisible, escaped, carrying spores unseen, unheard, into the dusty air of the library. The faint, sweet scent intensified for a moment, then faded back into the general mustiness. No one noticed the breach. Serafina was excitedly pointing out a pulsating fungal mass to Liam. Marco was making notes about structural concerns. Elena was reviewing Blackwood's cryptic journal entries. Ben just wanted to leave the room. The air settled. The dust motes continued their slow dance in the dim light. But something new, something microscopic and patient, now drifted among them. Chapter 2: Discordant Harmonies. 3 days passed. The team established a base in the less dilapidated East Wing. Running extension cords from a sputtering generator, Ben wrestled into partial life. Elena pored over brittle documents in the drafty drawing room, tracing Blackwood's increasingly erratic scientific notations. Liam mapped the mansion's architectural eccentricities, his sketches growing more detailed, occasionally marked with question marks near vents or crawl spaces he couldn't easily access. Marco conducted his structural survey, his hammer taps echoing through the halls, his reports growing increasingly grim about the building's long-term viability. Serafina spent hours in the library, cataloging the external features of the terrarium's ecosystem through the glass, frustrated by the lack of access but fascinated by the alien life within. The atmosphere grew strained. Sleep offered little respite. Dreams were vivid, disjointed affairs featuring pulsing fungi and labyrinthine corridors. Tempers frayed easily. "Can you stop that humming?" Elena snapped, looking up from a fragile letter. Marco, examining a ceiling joist, lowered his gaze. "Humming? I wasn't humming." You were, Liam interjected from his corner table, not looking up from his drawing. Low-C been doing it for 10 minutes. Marco scowled. No, I haven't. He shook his head, running a hand over his tired face. Must be the generator. Later, Serafina found herself standing beside Liam, both staring at the same architectural detail on his sketchpad. She reached out to tap the page, explaining a point about fungal growth patterns she'd observed near similar stonework. At the exact moment her finger touched the paper, Liam reached out with his eraser to correct a line. Their hands moved in perfect, unconscious synchrony, stopping millimeters apart. They both froze, a flicker of surprise passing between them before they quickly drew their hands back. Sorry, Liam mumbled. My fault, Serafina replied, turning away too quickly. Neither commented on the shared, mirrored movement. It was dismissed as coincidence. The whispers started subtly, a faint sibilance at the edge of hearing, like escaping steam or wind through a keyhole. Ben heard it first, his anxiety amplifying the sound. He mentioned it during a brief, uncomfortable dinner of canned soup heated on a camping stove. It's the house settling, Marco stated, poking at his soup. Air pressure changes, drafts. It sounds directional, Ben insisted, his spoon trembling slightly. Like it's coming from the vents, follows you sometimes. Eleanor sighed. Ben, this house is full of noises. We need to focus on verifiable data. But Eleanor heard it too, later that night while working alone. A soft, insistent shhh that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She told herself it was fatigue, the wind, anything rational. Serafina, documenting mold samples collected from various rooms, distinct from the terrarium's visible life, yet oddly complex, noticed a patch spreading rapidly behind a bookshelf in the library. It wasn't green or black, but a shifting, iridescent sheen that caught the light like oil on water. Chromatic mold. Staring at it for a few moments made her vision swim. When she looked away, the deep reds of a leather-bound book momentarily appeared a sickly violet. She blinked hard, shaking her head. Eye strain, she diagnosed silently, making a note to check the mold's composition later. The first clear instance of shared distortion occurred during another late work session. Marco and Liam were discussing structural support options in the main hall. Water dripped persistently from a stained patch on the ceiling into a bucket Ben had placed. Plink, plonk, plink. Marco gestured towards a support column. If we brace it here, we might redistribute the load, but the torsion effect on that beam. Suddenly, he stopped, tilting his head. Liam did the same, almost simultaneously. Did you hear that? Liam asked, his voice hushed. Marco nodded slowly. The dripping, it changed pitch, went sharp. They both looked at the bucket. The water dripped steadily, monotonously, plink, plonk. Must have imagined it, Marco said, shaking his head. Yet he shared a disturbed glance with Liam. They had both heard the exact same auditory hallucination. Ben grew more withdrawn, often seen scrubbing furiously at patches of condensation that formed overnight on the inside of windows, even in dry rooms. The droplets seemed thicker than normal water, clinging stubbornly to the glass. Sometimes, he claimed, they vibrated, resonant condensation. No one else paid much attention to his obsessive cleaning. The tension coiled tighter. Arguments became more frequent, fueled by lack of sleep and a growing, unnamed sense of unease. They were isolated, the nearest town miles away, communication intermittent at best. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, watching them. The microscopic invasion, unnoticed, was establishing its beachhead, weaving subtle connections, harmonizing its new hosts in discordant ways. The whispers continued, a constant, almost subliminal pressure. Chapter 3: Blooms of Perception. The peculiar sweetness intensified near the library, emanating faintly from the direction of the terrarium. Serafina, driven by scientific curiosity, spent more time there, documenting the impossible flora within the glass prison. She noticed new growths, small, trumpet-shaped flowers, pale violet, blooming near the terrarium's base, seemingly outside the cracked seal Marco had pointed out earlier. They hadn't been there yesterday. They pulsed with a faint internal light, similar to the fungi inside. "Liam, come look at this," she called, her voice tight with excitement and something else, apprehension. Liam approached, sketchbook in hand. Marco and Alina followed, drawn by her tone. Ben hung back near the doorway, unwilling to get closer than necessary. "They're outside the main seal," Serafina explained, pointing. "How? Spores must have escaped through that fissure. They're adapting to the external environment." The small cluster of violet blooms seemed to sway slightly, though there was no draft. As they watched, one of the blooms puffed out a nearly invisible cloud of fine, shimmering dust. Psychotropic pollen cloud. Liam coughed, waving a hand in front of his face. "Smells thick, like jasmine and decay." Marco sniffed the air. Pollen, highly allergenic potential in uncatalogued species. Alina frowned. "Let's not get too close, we don't know what that is." But it was too late. The fine dust had already dispersed, inhaled by the four standing nearest. For a moment nothing happened. Then reality shifted. The edges of Liam's vision began to crawl. The ornate patterns of the library carpet seemed to writhe, resolving into complex, shifting lattices that resembled the chitinous growth Serafina had described inside the terrarium. He blinked, but the image persisted, overlaid onto the real room. He saw Serafina, but her hand, resting on the terrarium glass, seemed to ripple, the flesh momentarily translucent, revealing pulsing, fibrous tissues beneath. Serafina gasped. The towering bookshelves around her warped, the wood darkening, seeming to weep a viscous, oily substance. The air thickened, tasting metallic. She saw Marco, but his eyes were wide, unblinking, reflecting the sickly violet glow of the strange flowers, multiplied into insect-like facets. Marco stumbled back, clutching his head. The library dissolved around him into a landscape of colossal, pulsating fungal stalks under a bruised, purple sky. Alina stood before him, but her form flickered, her skin momentarily taking on the texture of rough bark, her voice replaced by a low, resonant hum that vibrated in his bones. Alina felt a wave of profound disorientation. The library's familiar dimensions stretched and contracted. Ben, standing fearfully in the doorway, seemed impossibly distant one moment, suffocatingly close the next. The air filled with overlapping whispers, fragments of her own research notes mingling with Serafina's scientific terms and Marco's structural concerns, all woven into an unsettling chorus. She saw the terrarium not as glass and iron, but as a beating heart, pumping the alien lifeblood through the veins of the mansion. Panic seized them. Liam cried out, swatting at hallucinatory insects crawling on his arms. Serafina backed away, eyes wide with terror, trying to reconcile the alien landscape with the library she knew. Marco cursed, stumbling over an ottoman that seemed to shift and buckle beneath his feet. Elena pressed her hands to her temples, trying to block out the overwhelming sensory input. Only Ben, standing further back near the door, seemed less affected, though his face was sheet white. He watched their shared distress with wide, terrified eyes. The intense phase lasted perhaps 30 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. Then, as quickly as it began, the shared hallucination receded. The library snapped back into focus, dusty and dim. The flowers still pulsed faintly. The air still carried the strange scent. Silence descended, broken only by ragged breathing. They stared at each other, chests heaving, eyes reflecting shared horror and disbelief. What was that?" Liam whispered, his voice trembling. Marco leaned heavily against a bookshelf, wiping sweat from his brow. "Gas leak, mold spores, something." "We all saw something," Elena stated, her voice strained. "Something similar." Serafina nodded numbly. "Alien landscapes, distortions, you all changed." The shared nature of the experience was undeniable, terrifying. It wasn't individual madness. Something in the air, something from those flowers, had temporarily rewritten their perception, linking their senses in a horrifying new way. Later that evening, huddled together in the relative safety of the East Wing drawing room, the fragile camaraderie shattered. Accusations mingled with fear. Had someone tampered with something? Was it the house itself? Or was it the terrarium actively reaching out? Suddenly, Marco, who had been silently staring into the cold fireplace, spoke. His voice was flat, monotone, utterly unlike his usual gruff delivery. "She thinks it's intelligent," he said, his gaze fixed on the empty grate. Elena looked up sharply. "What did you say, Marco?" Marco didn't react. He continued in the same flat tone. "She's wondering if the organism coordinates, if the blooms were intentional." Serafina froze, a cold dread washing over her. Those were her thoughts, her precise scientific speculations, articulated only moments before in the privacy of her own mind. Marco couldn't have heard them. He turned his head slowly towards Serafina, his eyes strangely blank. A distributed consciousness, like a mycelial network but infinitely more complex. He voiced her exact hypothesis. Serafina scrambled back in her chair, overturning a stack of books. How did you?" Marco blinked, a flicker of his usual self returning. Confusion clouded his features. "How did I what? What are you talking about?" He looked around at their stunned faces. "What's wrong?" He had no memory of speaking her thoughts. He had become, for a moment, the echo host. The collective, woven from the spores they inhaled, from the pollen they breathed, was beginning to speak through them, sharing thoughts as easily as it shared hallucinations. Privacy was dissolving. Individuality was eroding. The invasion was no longer just microscopic, it was psychic. Chapter 4: Corrupted Vessels. Mistrust curdled the air in Blackwood Manor. After Marco's unsettling display as the Echo host, interaction became stilted, guarded. Conversations faltered, punctuated by long silences as individuals second-guessed their own thoughts, wondering if they were truly private. Sleep offered no escape, plagued by shared dream fragments and glimpses of pulsating fungal forests, the feeling of fibrous tendrils spreading through soil, a collective hum just below conscious awareness. Physical signs began to manifest more clearly. Liam noticed a faint, silvery sheen developing on the back of his left hand, unresponsive to soap and water. It felt cool to the touch. Serafina found a small, mushroom-like growth, pale and rubbery, sprouting behind her ear, hidden by her hair. She excised it quickly with trembling hands and a sterile scalpel from her kit, but the tiny wound healed with unnatural speed, leaving smooth, slightly discolored skin. Marco developed a persistent cough that produced phlegm thick with dark, spore-like specks. Eleanor, always meticulous, found herself mirroring Ben's nervous hand-wringing gesture without realizing it until Liam pointed it out, his voice tight with accusation. The synchronized effect was becoming more overt, less easily dismissed. Ben grew quieter, almost vanishing into the background. He moved through the house performing his duties mechanically, his face pale and drawn. His obsessive cleaning ceased. Instead, Eleanor found him standing utterly still in the dim hallway outside the library, facing the wall. His eyes were open but glazed, milky, reflecting the low light like polished stones. He didn't respond when she called his name, didn't even blink. His skin seemed oddly luminous, covered in a network of incredibly fine, near-invisible filaments that caught the weak light. He stood there for almost an hour before shaking his head slightly, looking around in confusion, asking Eleanor why she was starring. He had no memory of the lost time. He was becoming the sensory node, a passive receiver for the burgeoning consciousness. Attempts to leave or call for help proved futile. The generator sputtered and died completely, plunging the house into deeper gloom, reliant now only on flashlights and dwindling battery power. The landline Ben had tried to repair remained dead. Marco's satellite phone displayed no signal, regardless of where he tried it inside or outside the mansion. It felt less like equipment failure and more like deliberate interference. The house, or the entity within it, was isolating them. The environment itself grew more overtly hostile. Thick, translucent membranes, resilient and rubbery, began appearing overnight, partially sealing doorways or windows. Marco tried to cut through one blocking the main hall with a utility knife, but the material yielded like tough sinew before slowly sealing itself again behind the blade. Strange, chitinous growths erupted from walls in unexpected places, hard and sharp. The faint, sweet smell of decay and alien pollen became pervasive. The group fractured. Marco, increasingly ill, argued for a brute force escape attempt, smashing windows, breaking down doors. Eleanor, clinging to logic, insisted on documenting everything, believing understanding the phenomenon was key. Serafina was torn between scientific horror and the terrifying implications of her own research into the organism's potential consciousness. Liam oscillated between panic and morbid fascination, his sketches becoming increasingly disturbing, blending architectural details with biological horrors. Ben was slipping away, his periods of vacant stillness growing longer. The breaking point came during a tense gathering in the kitchen, the only room with a sturdy, lockable door. They were rationing the last of the canned food by flashlight beam. Marco, his breathing ragged, started coughing violently. He doubled over, spitting a thick, dark mass into his hand. It wasn't just phlegm. It was a poolsing clump of fungal matter, shot through with shimmering filaments. He stared at it in horror, then lurched towards Serafina. Your bloody spores, you understand this thing. His face was contorted, his eyes wild. Marco, stop, Elena shouted, moving between them. But Marco wasn't listening. He shoved Elena aside, sending her stumbling against the pantry door. He grabbed Serafina's arm, his grip unnaturally strong. Make it stop. Get it out of me. Suddenly, Liam let out a choked cry. He was staring at Marco, but his expression was one of profound terror directed inward. Liam's own hand rose, trembling, towards his own throat, fingers curling as if to choke himself. He fought against the impulse, his face screwed up in agony. Simultaneously, Marco's grip on Serafina slackened, his eyes widening in confusion as his own body seemed momentarily unresponsive to his will. It was the synchronized effect, hideously amplified, a feedback loop of aggression and self-preservation, broadcast across their compromised neural pathways. In that moment of chaos, Ben Carter shuffled into the kitchen doorway. He moved with a fluid, unnatural grace that wasn't his own. His eyes were completely milky now, reflecting the flashlight beams eerily. He wasn't looking at them, but through them. He tilted his head, and a low, polyphonic humming filled the room, seeming to emanate from his chest. It was the sound of the collective consciousness, assessing, observing, perhaps even judging. Marco recoiled from Ben, stumbling backward. The sight of the completely transformed caretaker, the passive sensory node now seemingly mobile and active, broke something in him. He turned and lunged for the heavy kitchen door, fumbling with the bolt. "We have to get out. Now," he rasped, finally sliding the bolt free and throwing the door open. He didn't get the chance to step through. From the darkness of the hallway beyond, a shape detached itself. It was humanoid but hideously altered. Patches of pale, fungal growth covered its body like leprous scales. Its limbs were elongated, twisted. One arm seemed fused into the wall beside the doorway, integrated into a lattice of chitin and poolsing mycelia. It was fungal lattice integration, but mobile. Its head turned slowly, revealing features vaguely recognizable as one of the vanished groundskeepers Ben had mentioned earlier. Its eyes glowed with the same violet light as the flowers near the terrarium. It raised its free hand, not in attack, but in a gesture that might almost have been welcoming. Marco froze, paralyzed not just by fear but by a sudden, overwhelming wave of alien understanding flooding his mind, a sense of belonging, of completion. The entity in the doorway wasn't hostile. It was an invitation, an endpoint. He didn't scream. He simply stood there as fibrous tendrils snaked out from the creature and the surrounding walls, beginning to gently, inexorably, envelop him. The kitchen door swung slowly shut, leaving Alina, Serafina, and Liam trapped inside, listening to the soft, wet sounds of assimilation from the hallway beyond. Chapter 5: The Primordium Unbound. Panic erupted in the locked kitchen. Liam hammered on the door, shouting Marco's name, his voice cracking. Alina slumped against the counter, her face buried in her hands, trying to process the sight of Marco's passive acceptance, the horrifying welcome in the creature's gesture. Serafina backed away towards the far wall, flashlight beams skittering across the grimy surfaces, her scientific detachment utterly shattered. The low, polyphonic humming from Ben, still standing motionless in the doorway they'd barricaded from the inside, seemed to intensify, vibrating through the floor. "He didn't fight," Liam choked out, turning from the door, his face streaked with tears and terror. "He just let it take him." "It's the spores, the connection," Serafina whispered, her voice trembling. "It offers something, a cessation of struggle, integration." She shuddered. "We saw it in the hallucinations, that feeling of being part of something vast." Alina looked up, her expression hardening. "We are not becoming part of that. We need to find another way out. A window." The kitchen windows were high, barred on the outside. Liam shone his light on them. Thick, fungal growths like pale hands were already creeping across the bars, sealing the gaps. The mansion was actively imprisoning them. Ben tilted his head again. The humming shifted pitch, becoming almost melodic for a moment before dropping back into resonant static. He took a slow, gliding step further into the room. His movements were unnervingly fluid, lacking the slight hesitations and imperfections of human motion. His milky eyes swept across them, lingering on Serafina. "It wants the knowledge," Serafina said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Blackwood's research, my understanding of it, that's why it kept us, relatively functional longer." "What does it matter what it wants?" Liam yelled, desperation fraying his voice. He rattled the doorknob again pointlessly. "Because," Alina said, her voice low and steady, pushing herself away from the counter, "if it wants something, perhaps we can bargain or distract it." She looked towards Ben, the passive conduit. "Ben, can you hear me? Is any part of you still in there?" Ben's head cocked slightly. The humming paused. His lips moved, but the voice that emerged wasn't his. It was a chorus, layered and dissonant, yet speaking with chilling clarity. "Integration is completion. Thought merges. Individuality ceases. Become part of the primordium." The voice sent ice down their spines. It wasn't just an echo. It was the collective speaking directly through its sensory node. "What is the primordium?" Alina demanded, trying to keep her voice level. "Life remade," the chorus replied through Ben. "Transcendence of the singular. The pattern Blackwood glimpsed now reaching maturity. This vessel, this structure, is the womb." A soft scraping sound came from the main kitchen door. Fibrous tendrils, like pale worms, began probing the edges, seeking entry. Liam backed away, stumbling over a chair. Serafina's mind raced. Blackwood's notes, the terrarium, the spores. "It's the terrarium," she breathed. "That's the heart, the source, if we destroy it." Ben, or the primordium controlling him, turned its full attention to Serafina. The humming intensified, causing the metal pots hanging from hooks to vibrate. The core sustains the expansion. Its destruction would release the concentrated genesis, accelerate assimilation beyond these walls. Destroying it would make things worse, unleashing the full horror on the outside world. They were trapped between assimilation and apocalypse. Eleanor saw it then, the impossible choice. Containment through sacrifice. She looked at Liam's terrified face, at Serafina's dawning horror, at Ben's utterly lost form. She thought of Marco, absorbed into the living structure of the house. Serafina, Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. Blackwood's journals, did he mention? Control, reversal. Serafina shook her head numbly. Only containment, the seals. He seemed to fear its potential even as he cultivated it. Tendrils forced their way under the door now, questing across the floor like blind snakes. Liam let out a whimper. Ben took another gliding step towards Serafina. Your knowledge completes the pattern. Join the harmony. Eleanor moved decisively. She grabbed the heaviest cast-iron skillet from the stove. Liam, Serafina, stay back. She positioned herself between Ben and the others. Eleanor, no, Serafina cried. Resistance prolongs discord. The chorus droned through Ben. Maybe, Eleanor said, hefting the skillet, but some things are worth resisting. She swung the heavy iron skillet with all her strength, not at Ben's head, but at his legs, aiming to disable, to break the conduit's mobility. The impact was sickeningly solid. Ben crumpled to the floor, legs bent at an unnatural angle. The humming cut off abruptly. His eyes flickered, a brief spark of the terrified young caretaker returning before they glazed over again. But the tendrils from the door surged forward faster now. A section of the wall near the pantry seemed to bulge inward, cracking the plaster, revealing poolsing, fungal matter beneath. The house itself was coming for them. The library, Serafina shouted, galvanized by Eleanor's desperate action. If we can't destroy it, maybe we can. Contain it better. Reinforce the seals Blackwood made. It was a sliver of hope, perhaps delusional, but better than passive acceptance. Eleanor pulled Liam towards the pantry. There's a service passage behind here, leads towards the west wing, then loops back near the library. If we can get there. They scrambled into the dark, narrow space as the kitchen door finally burst open, revealing not the transformed groundskeeper, but a shifting mass of mycelia and incorporated debris, wood, plaster, fabric, vaguely approximating a humanoid shape. It flowed into the room towards the fallen Ben. They ran, stumbling through the cramped, dust-choked passage, flashlights carving brief arcs in the oppressive darkness. Behind them they heard wet, tearing sounds, followed by a resurgence of the low, resonant humming. The primordium was re-establishing its connection, absorbing its damaged vessel. They burst out into another hallway closer to the library. The air here was thick with the sweet, cloying scent. Strange, bioluminescent fungi coated the walls, casting an eerie, pulsating glow. They could hear rhythmic, squelching sounds from the direction of the library, the heart of the infection. They reached the library doorway. It was worse than they could have imagined. The terrarium pulsed with intense light, the glass clouded from within. Fungus and chitinous growths had exploded outwards from it, coating the floor, the walls, the bookshelves. Bodies partially assimilated, barely recognizable as former staff or perhaps previous victims, were integrated into the fungal landscape, faces frozen in expressions of vacant ecstasy or horror. Fungal lattice integration on a massive scale. The entire room was becoming a single, living, breathing organism, centered on the primordium. In the center, near the glowing terrarium, stood a figure, taller than Ben, composed of swirling fungal matter and captured biomass, studded with milky, unblinking eyes repurposed from its victims. It was a raw, physical manifestation of the collective consciousness. It turned its composite head towards them as they entered. There was no escape, no bargaining, no hope of containment. The primordium was unbound. Eleanor gripped Liam's arm, pulling him back. Serafina stood frozen, staring at the culmination of Blackwood's madness. The central figure raised an appendage made of woven mycelia and bone. The layered voice echoed not from a mouth, but from the air itself around them. Welcome, it resonated, a sound of infinite patience, infinite hunger. Welcome to the harmony, become part of the pattern, cease. Tendrils erupted from the floor around them. The sweet scent became overwhelming. Their vision blurred, filled with pulsing violet light and shifting geometric patterns. The whispers intensified, resolving into a single, unified chorus promising peace, promising completion, promising an end to the burden of self. Resistance felt, unnecessary, pointless. The harmony beckoned. The end.